Okay, we are recording. Go ahead, Debbie.
Hi, my name is Debbie Ortman. I live in Hermantown, Minnesota, which is right next to Duluth, Minnesota, which is at the headwaters of Lake Superior. And I have been an organic gardener for almost 40 years. Here we have 2.5 acres. I have a 3,500 square foot garden that has fruit trees, raised beds for vegetable growing, lots of flowers, and also fruits like berries and raspberries and honeyberries. And so I'm going to be talking to you today about why you should be growing organically. I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit because I'm sure many of you already support that philosophy. And so hopefully this isn't going to be too repetitious for you. But there's a lot of information that I want to share in this next hour. I will kind of go through things fairly fast. If any of you have questions or um, need to contact me, you can get that information through the co-op. They will share my cell phone number with you and my email, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. I want to thank you for attending this class, and uh, I want to, for those attending via Zoom who live throughout the United States, please be aware that my presentation is targeted to growing in northern Minnesota, but hopefully you will be able to glean a few new tips and information. And I'd like to give a shout out to my sister-in-law, Annette, who is in South Carolina. She's joining us on the Zoom today, so that's kind of fun. Although the growing conditions in South Carolina are much different than here in northern Minnesota. Um, Handouts and a copy of this entire presentation and pretty much all of the resources that I'm going to be sharing with you today are available through the co-op. And they will be posting that information so it's accessible to all of you. And let's see, let's start with why organic. It's healthier for you, your children, and the planet. Pesticides are toxic and can be taken up by vegetables, fruits, and herbs that you ingest. And they are harmful not only to us as humans, but animals, beneficials, insects, bees, butterflies, and other pollinators. In addition, freshness counts. Many fruits and vegetables start losing nutrients as soon as they are picked. Like spinach and even the organic produce you eat in the store can be picked days and weeks ago and travel thousands of miles. When you can, please buy local, support farmer markets, join a CSA, support your local co-op. And for those of you that don't know what a CSA is, it's community supported agriculture. And it's where you end up supporting a local family, farm family in growing healthy, organic, sustainably grown food for you and your family. And so you can buy a share. You can get more information about that online. My organic philosophy, organic gardening is my passion, and hopefully it's your passion too. It's at least one of my passions. I have many passions. There are many benefits to backyard gardening. It keeps you active mentally and physically. One derives much satisfaction in growing healthy local food for yourself, your family, and friends. It helps the environment. It can be cheaper to grow your own organic food than buying it. And a garden and fruit trees and shrubs can add value to your property. Gardening is not difficult, nor does it have to take a lot of time and effort. A book many of us can relate to, who've been growing for a while, is The $64 Tomato by William Alexander. And it's a quick read, and I'm sure your library can get you a copy. And it's kind of a fun read. It has a lot of humor in it. So I always like to mention that. I'm going to tell you what the top 10 reasons are for growing organic and buying organic. It protects future generations. It protects our planet for future generations. It helps to prevent soil erosion. It protects water quality. It helps you to save energy. It keeps chemicals off of your plate. It protects farm workers' health. It helps small farmers and family farms. It supports a true economy. It promotes biodiversity. And we all know that everything tastes better. A homegrown tomato that you picked on a nice warm day, there's just no comparison to what you buy in the store. It's just has so much more flavor. And again, when you pick things directly from your garden, from your, or in containers, you're going to get the best benefit from that fruit or vegetable. My motto for starting a garden is keep it simple and start small. If you do that, you're not going to feel so overwhelmed. I've heard so many stories of where people planted a large garden and they just got frustrated with it. It was overwhelming to keep up the weeding. Keep it simple, start small. The key ingredients to a good garden are picking the right spot, having good soil, which includes compost, soil amendments, and fertilizing, having good drainage, regular watering, sunlight, companion planting, and mulching to prevent weed growth and keep your soil moist during dry spells. Spacing, for limited spacing, I recommend using trellises, fencing, or tripods and grow in containers. I plant all of my peas and beans on trellises and tripods. And right now in northern Minnesota, I plant all of my peppers in containers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Soil types. I'm going to devote a lot of time talking about soil and soil types and what you need to have a healthy soil. And I'm going to talk about that because a lot of people just kind of think they can just grow whatever is under their grass or under the ground. And there's a lot more to soil health than maybe what you actually can see. We typically here in northern Minnesota have compacted clay soils, and you might have that in other places in the United States as well. And we also typically have higher rain levels, although last year we experienced a drought, and they're predicting one for this summer as well. But because of that, here in northern Minnesota, I really recommend using the French intensive method of raised rows, either by mounding the soil up or having raised beds like I have in my garden. And my favorite book is this one right here, How to Grow More Vegetables by John Javon. And this is available through your library, or you can order it online. It's still in print. But this I have used for close to 40 years. It tells you everything from, if you are interested in square foot gardening, raised beds, companion planting, how to plan your garden, how to space, how to have things, you don't want to plant something that needs full sun next to something that's going to shade that plant. It's all in here. This is just an incredible resource, and this is listed in the resource guide that the co-op will make available to you as well. Let's see. So I want you to be aware of what I use in my gardens. I use a mixture both in my raised beds and in my containers of the following. I combine a mixture of compost, basically the compost for my garden. I'm going to talk a little bit more about compost in a little bit. So it's compost, your existing dirt. We take the dirt out of our containers. Like when I have been growing things in a container, I'll typically take 1/3 of the top dirt out and then add my amendments and then mix it all in really well. And then for our raised beds, we also dig out the dirt about a foot down, and we screen it and sift it, primarily to remove rocks and roots. For raised beds, you really want to go down for at least 12 inches or until you hit your clay, which sometimes can be as close as 8 to 10 inches below the ground surface here in northern Minnesota. We add peat to help with aeration. Roots need light aerated soil in order for them to grow. They will not grow in hard compacted soil. Peat also helps to break up clay type soils, but you have to be aware that peat is acidic, so you don't want to use too much peat and increase the acidity of your soil. I also recommend using perlite. Perlite is the white stuff. A lot of people, when they buy something at a greenhouse or buy some potting soil in the store, see that white stuff and they think that it's styrofoam. It's not. Perlite, which aids in aeration, is a form of shapeless volcanic glass that is heated up to 1600 degrees, at which point it pops just like popcorn, which is what makes it white, and it swells up to 13 times its former size, lending it to be a very lightweight material, which really helps to aerate your soils. And unlike styrofoam, it doesn't have any negative effects with your soil. It's also kind of nicknamed the volcanic popcorn. I'd like to actually see how they manufacture that. So when you see white stuff in your store, again, it's not styrofoam, it's perlite. We also add composted manures. My favorite is well-composted sheep manure, but it is very hard to find that. So I recommend a dried chicken or turkey manure that's pelletized and slow release. My favorite is a product called Co-op Poop. It's dried chicken manure, and it is wonderful for your garden. You can use it as a in your watering cans for watering, and you can use it in your soil and in your containers. I mix it right in, and it's because it's slow release that really helps to spread out that nitrogen that your plants really need and need to grow to feed on. You can also use well-composted cow manure, but I recommend avoiding horse manure. We used horse manure one year and I covered it with black plastic for 3 years. And as soon as I used it, I had unwanted plants, i.e. weeds, coming up everywhere in the garden. So I try to avoid horse manure if you can. Horses do not digest weed seeds, and so that's why they end up still being active. Sometimes I'll add sand, which also helps to break up clay soils. If you have a source for clean sand, you could put a little sand in. And gypsum. Gypsum is one of my favorite additives. It's a naturally occurring mineral. It contains calcium, and it really helps to break up clay and hard-packed soils. But because it contains calcium, which a lot of plants need, and which it's beneficial to put that in because it helps to prevent blossom end rot. Some of you might be familiar with that term, but it typically happens more likely on tomatoes, but it can also affect peppers and squash and other heavy feeders that start, you get this beautiful fruit that's formed and it starts ripening, and then all of a sudden at the end, it starts turning black and the whole thing just starts to rot. That's blossom end rot, and it's solely caused from a lack of calcium. Because we have clay-based soils up here, the calcium is bound up in the clay and is not released so that your plants can take that up. If you're going to add gypsum, only use the granular type. Because it is a mineral, you don't want to use the powdered form because you don't want to ingest that. For older beds, I also use a green manure cover crop, like annual rye. So actually, we'll probably be doing that for a few of our beds in the next week. This time of year is a good time to do that up here in northern Minnesota. And so we just spread the annual rye and wait till it comes up about 3 inches. And then we, till it under or turn the sod under. What that does is it really is a great source of nitrogen. And it also helps with aerating your soil and breaking up any compacted soil because the roots will do that. And so that's a lot of, especially, I know a lot of CSA farmers tend to use cover crops, and annual rye is one. There's clover, there's a few other ones. I typically have been using mainly annual rye. One of the biggest problems a home gardener faces in a new or established garden is poor soil, clay or hard pan type of soil, poor drainage, soggy soil, soil compaction, are just a few of the conditions that a lot of home gardeners end up facing when they want to put in a garden. So it's important to determine what type of soil you have so you know how to improve that soil. That just makes sense. If you have sandy loam soils, you will need to add a significant amount of compost. So I recommend getting your soil tested. Here in Minnesota, you can, through the University of Minnesota and through your extension service, you can go and collect some of your dirt that's growing where you want to put your garden and send it in. All the instructions are listed here on both sides. Talks about how you sample your area, how deep you go, and send it in, and they will send you within usually 2 to 4 weeks a complete outline or information about what they have found in your soils, what level of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you have, and their recommendations. They actually will make recommendations. In other states, most states I'm aware of have extension services, and so you can either look online and get information about how you can do a soil test. Now, if you can't find something online, I would call your Minnesota Department of Agriculture or if you know that a university close to you is a land grant university, a lot of times they do that, provide that service as well. But it's really important because it gives you that base of information. So I want to talk a little bit more about soil types for here in northern Minnesota. The Duluth Community Garden Program, which is a wonderful program we have in the Duluth area, where you can actually become a member of the community garden, and you can actually get a community garden plot. So if you live in an apartment, or don't have enough space on your property, if you own your home, you can, for a very minimal fee, get a garden plot, and they provide a lot of assistance. Well, they used to put out this great newsletter. This one's, believe it or not, from 2005, so obviously I've kept it for a while because it has such great information. But here it talks about the soils that we find in the Duluth area. We typically find either sandy loam, clay, silt or silty loam, peat, or sand. Here in this area, as part of Duluth, Minnesota, we have Park Point, which is a 5-mile sand spit. One of the, I believe it is the largest freshwater sand spit in the world. And of course, it's all mainly sand. So for gardening down there, and I have gardening friends that live down there, and there's also a community garden that they have down there, they have to add a tremendous amount of compost and additives in order to get things to grow. And so regardless of where you live, make sure you know what soils you have, what soil conditions, and you could even ask your neighbors who have gardens. You could see if you have community garden programs in your area. There is just a great resource to give you that information. What is a soil profile? I want to talk about that because it's really important that we understand what's under the ground. And they've identified it and called it a soil profile. And basically a soil profile consists of several soil horizons. The first horizon is called the O horizon. And you'll see that that's basically the very top couple inches. And that's where you'll see a lot of micronutrients. You'll see a lot of worms. And that's really an area that you can identify how healthy your soil is. The A horizon is next. That comes right under that O horizon, and that really is your topsoil. So including the O horizon and the A horizon is about the top, 2 to 10, or excuse me, 0 to 12 inches of soil. And it's rich in organic matter, typically dark color. It's also called a zone of leaching because obviously water and everything leaches through that and goes down into the lower levels. The B horizon, that's the dreaded clay and rock, and nothing really penetrates that. You'll see there might be a few roots, and this, by the way, this handout will be available through the co-op as well. You'll see that very few roots can even penetrate this. And below the clay is, of course, the bedrock, and nothing penetrates that unless it's fractured and some of the water can seep down through that. So it's important to understand that your soil, what's under the ground, and it's important to realize how important that first 10, 12 inches is so that you can grow, healthy, sustainable fruits and vegetables and herbs as well. So I want to show you, excuse me for leaving the picture. I want to show you some different examples of compost. Compost is a soil amendment, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but I'm going to show you right now these different samples. So this is some compost from our backyard, from our piles where it's mainly maple leaves and refuse from the garden. We put it here. We've sifted it. You'll see it's very crumbly. It's kind of on the dry side. There's really very few micronutrient or microorganisms in this. There are micronutrients, but very few microorganisms in this. And it's just, it's fairly dense. And so if I were to add water to it and clump it up, it would form this kind of a clump because there is some clay in here as well. But I want you to see what this looks like. And then we'll do a comparison for another type of compost. So I use this compost for my raised beds and in my containers as well. But I want to show you what compost looks like for my food waste. And we have different containers that we put all of our food waste, fruits and vegetables in. We mix it with some leaves, a little bit of straw, sometimes grass clippings, but I typically leave all my grass clippings on the lawn when we cut our grass. But I want you to see the difference. Do you see how much darker this is? It's very moist. It has lots of eggshells in it. Let's see if I can find one. I know there was one here earlier. Well, there's eggshells in there because we put a lot of eggshells in my compost that break down. But this is full of microorganisms and worms, and this is incredibly beneficial. In fact, our local sanitary district runs a municipal composting program, and they actually did a test comparing their food waste to a similar compost to like what I showed you in the first. That's just kind of basically your backyard compost that you just put leaves and weeds and things left over from your garden or from mowing. And the food waste compost had a much higher nutrient content. And of course, that's what you want, because those plants, in order for them to grow and be healthy and produce, give you large produce from each plant, it really needs those micronutrients that can be pulled up. But it's important to know, a lot of people think compost is fertilizer, and it's not. It's a soil amendment. It has very little, if any, nitrogen. And the important thing about adding compost, it helps with aeration. It helps to provide micronutrients and microorganisms to your garden and even to containers. And then I want to show you a sample of a commercial product. The white is your perlite. This is dry and it's sterile. So it's nice to add this, but it has no living organisms in it. And it really has very little micronutrients as well. And so this is basically helps, it's an additive that you'd add to your soil to help aid with aeration. And why is aeration so important? Why do I keep on talking about the importance of aerated soils? Because roots can just not penetrate compacted clay soils. And that's another benefit to growing things in containers and having raised beds. Because if you grow it, just in the ground, in wherever your garden area is, and you're walking on it, and it's getting compacted by the rain and dried by the sun, it's going to be much harder for those roots to be able to grow down deep, to be able to pull that moisture up, and to be able to pull up those micronutrients. So I wanted to show you what that looks like as well. What to grow and how to plan your garden. The Duluth Public Library has, believe it or not, over 175 books related to organic gardening. I'm sure your public library has a similar volume of a variety of books that can help you with planning, with deciding what you want to grow, and give you some of that information. This book that I recommended also has a lot of that good information for planning a garden. So go to your library and peruse the books. Again, remember my motto. Remember, start small and keep it simple. Grow what you like best. If you love cherry tomatoes, just grow cherry tomatoes. I would encourage people to think about growing, cherry tomatoes in a container. If you live in an apartment, you can easily grow tomatoes, herbs, other vegetables in containers on your patio, on your deck. And again, there's just nothing better than picking that ripe cherry tomato that you've grown. So determine what you want to grow and what you like best. Obviously, if you don't like squash, I'm not a big squash fan, don't grow squash. Be aware of your space limitations. There are plants like squash, pumpkins, watermelon that take up a lot of space. They need huge areas to be able to grow. So kind of be aware of what is the space constraints that you currently have and what can you grow in that. So for planting your garden, you really want to pick a sunny spot, make sure you get 6 to 8 hours of direct sun, and prepare the soil as recommended earlier. Keep track of what you plant, and where you plant it year by year. Our son, who is much more computer literate than I am, was able to use a program to draw this great, can you see it? Draw this great diagram that I use year after year. And I write in all the little squares and off to the sides what I'm growing, because there's certain things that you don't want to grow in the same spot year after year. Like if you grow tomatoes in one raised bed, you don't want to grow them that next year in that raised bed, because tomatoes are heavy feeders. So the next year you want to give that soil a break and grow something that's a light feeder, such as lettuce or spinach or kale or Swiss chard, or strawberries are a light feeder, or herbs are all light feeders. So you know, if by keeping track of and having a layout of your garden space, it is really handy and gives you that information, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I have a hard time remembering stuff from year after year. So having this is very beneficial to remind me what I grew last year and where I grew it. Container gardening, everyone always asks me about container gardening. The realities are you can grow almost anything in a container: herbs, flowers, vegetables. When I use containers, I pretty much use the same mix of soil as mentioned earlier. I don't usually use perlite in my raised beds, but I do use it in the containers because it really helps to aerate the soil. But when I use containers, I put a landscape fabric down at the very bottom to cover the holes, because then your soil isn't going to leach out. So there's a little tip for you. Currently, I really only grow some cherry tomatoes and peppers in my large black containers, since they perform the best when being provided that additional heat that black containers provide. But I've pretty much grown all different vegetables in containers. Last year, I grew some eggplants, some Brussels sprouts. What else did I grow? Eggplants and Brussels sprouts. A few other things in containers, because they like that the additional heat that you get from growing in a black container. And I have found that certain things that like that heat do much better in a container versus even in my raised beds when I do a comparison. The key to container gardening is to not let them dry out. If you let your container dry out, it's going to affect the health of the plant and how much produce you're actually going to be able to get from that individual plant. So what I do is, after the temperatures have warmed up to 65, even 70 degrees, then I will heavily water my containers, and then I will put mulch. Two of my favorite mulches I like to use for containers, well, actually three: straw, shredded leaves, and we have a lot of maple leaves here on our 2.5 acres. And also last year I tried moss for the first time, and boy, did that work great. It really helped to hold the moisture in, and I didn't have any unwanted plants that came up through that moss. So if you have a lot of moss in your area, think about using that as a mulch, something a little different. Let's see. I also use heavy duty plant saucers under my containers that are on my deck. So if you have a patio or if you have a deck, I'd recommend using these plant saucers like this. And here's a little tip: if we're on your deck, especially if you have a wooden deck like I do, if you put these little pads down or these little sticky sliders, it really helps to preserve your deck. Because if this is just sitting on the wood and it gets wet, of course, it's going to start rotting that wood, taking off the paint or your stain. And so here's a little tip for you for utilizing these great saucers and protecting your deck. Also, these sliders, if you get the really big ones and you want to move your plants around for some reason, like move them maybe in the shade or, you know, to a different part on your patio or your deck, these little sliders can really help. Again, if people have questions about growing in containers, please contact me and I'll be happy to try and answer your question. Companion planting. I want to really talk about the benefits of companion planting and give you a little bit more information. Plus, I have a great handout for you that will be available again through the co-op. But the benefits of companion planting are it's an efficient use of space. It provides shade and support. It keeps your soil healthy. It helps to deter weeds, unwanted plants. It helps with disease control, attracts beneficials, and repels garden pests. Here is a copy of the handout that you'll all get, and it goes from A to Z, and it tells you not only what are the companions for like asparagus. Here it lists basil, parsley, tomatoes are companions for asparagus, and it tells you what your plant allies are, which are marigolds. Marigolds are one of my favorite companion plant. In every single one of my raised beds and around my containers, I love planting marigolds. They help to deter whiteflies. They actually help to deter mosquitoes, and we have lots of mosquitoes here in northern Minnesota, so I like putting marigolds on my deck where we spend a fair amount of time during the summer. But they also, on this, it tells you what you don't want to grow. So there's really nothing, it doesn't list anything here for asparagus, but let's say for beans, the things that you don't want to plant with beans or plant near beans are garlic, onions, and shallots. They actually will stunt the growth of beans. So this is a great resource, a great handout. And this will be available to all of you as well. I do a tremendous amount of companion planting and intercropping, which is another name for companion planting. And a good example would be my what I plant around my tomatoes. I plant herbs. My favorite is basil. Basil doesn't like direct sun. It will wither and it'll get black spots. If you plant it next and around your tomatoes, and I do it around my peppers as well, the tomatoes and the peppers will shade that basil. And it's just a great combination to plant basil next to your tomatoes. But the companion planting, it really, what it does is it gives you it gives you the opportunity to grow more things together in a smaller space. Tomatoes take up a fair amount of space. They take up, their roots go really deep and they spread out. So if you plant herbs or pretty much herbs is what I plant around my tomatoes, they have very shallow roots and they need a little bit of shade, and a lot of herbs actually do best in shade. And you'll get a handout on herbs as well. So keep that in mind when you're doing companion planting. Let's see, I think that's about all I want to cover on the companion planting, because and this is another handout too on companion planting, and I believe will we post this one too?
Yep,
Okay.
everything's going.
Everything's going to be posted. So great resources for you. Let's see. Okay, we got that covered. So seeds, we're going to turn this around and I'm going to show you how we start our seeds. I think you just, yeah. So you can get these at a lot of your hardware stores. We got this at Menards, which is a hardware store here in the Duluth area. And these are seriously 10 to 15 bucks. And this is has 1, 2, 3, 5 shelves. And you can see we have put grow lights underneath. You can see the grow lights under here. And we start all of our seeds in this setup. So basically, you want to, when you get your seed packet, you really want to read that seed packet. It gives you a ton of information. How long that particular plant needs from seed to actually, picking that right tomato. And you want that information. You also want the information on that seed packet that will tell you how deep to plant the seeds and basically how to start seeds inside, especially up here in northern Minnesota, where we have problems with early and late frost. I'll get to that in a minute as well. The other thing I really want to talk about, I try and grow almost all heirlooms. An heirloom is a plant, like a vegetable plant, that will grow true to that seed. It hasn't been hybridized. It hasn't been altered in any way. And if you don't buy a heirloom seed and you try and save seeds year after year from, let's say, a big boy tomato, which I know a lot of people like, it will not be the same big boy next year. That seed will not stay true. Heirlooms, the seed will stay true year after year after year. So I try to only grow heirlooms, and because I save all my seeds. Seeds, as you all know, because you've been buying seeds, have gotten really expensive, especially over the last few years. And so if you can save the seeds year after year, it really helps to save on that cost of seeds. So it's important also to read the packaging on your seeds, because it will tell you, should you start this several weeks before you want to plant it, or can you plant that seed directly into the garden? Obviously, here in northern Minnesota, we have to start, things that have a longer season: tomatoes, peppers, squash, pumpkins, those kind of things that sometimes need 120 days from start to being able to actually have your produce. And so you need to be aware of that. But a lot of things you can start from seed directly into your garden. Things like kale, anything that's like a short season. Kale, lettuce, spinach. I've already planted here my spinach, which is now up about this high. And beans are something I've already planted, or no, excuse me, not beans, peas. And the next thing I'll plant are my beans. And so you kind of learn where your growing conditions are. And what I've learned here in northern Minnesota is that there are some seeds that will germinate at cool temperatures, because our evening temperatures are still getting down to almost freezing. And so, believe it or not, spinach and peas will both germinate at that temperature. Beans need just a little bit more. I'd say they need to be, around hovering closer to that 40-degree temperature at night. For those of you like my sister-in-law in South Carolina, you don't even need to worry about that, because your temperatures, are so much warmer than we have here, which my brother likes to remind me of fairly often, how much warmer it is there than here. So the basic rule is make sure that you educate yourself about how long it takes to grow and produce. Plants that need a longer growing season need to be started inside sometimes months or weeks before planting outside. Like a lot of flowers in particular, a lot of the annuals that you like to buy at the greenhouse, they've actually started some of those in January and February here in northern Minnesota. So our system here is, in order for your seed, actually I'll show you this one because the seeds are already up. So in order for a seed to germinate that we start inside here, it just needs two things: moisture and heat. Does not need sunlight at this point. And that's all it needs. So we have heating pads. That's what these are underneath here, our heating pads that we plug in. And they keep it at a nice, probably 60 to 70 degree temperature. And then we have to keep them evenly moist, make sure that they're well watered. You don't want them to dry out. If you plant seeds like this and you let them dry out, they will not germinate. So it's important that you keep them well watered. And you can see here, my husband planted some of our favorite cucumbers, Nokio, which is a long Japanese cucumber. And he just planted these really just about 4 or 5 days ago, and look at, they popped up already. And I like using, we reuse a lot of the, 4-packs and 6-packs. You can see like these are kind of falling apart, they're cracked and stuff, but I reuse these until they have totally disintegrated. A lot of people like using these more cardboard paper type containers. The only problem I have found with using this type of container is it tends to be more prone to mold, which you don't want because it will negatively affect your seedlings. But there are different types of containers. And then we reuse these trays year after year. I reuse the 6-packs, we reuse these tops, but you want to have everything sterile, because there are certain diseases. One of them is called dampening off, that can kill your seedlings. And that happens if you have not properly sterilized them. And you can sterilize these containers using vinegar, hydrogen peroxide, or a 3 to 5% bleach solution. So I end up washing all of these containers and storing them for the winter so that they're available for me to use in the spring. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, seed starting timetable. So a lot of, I've noticed a lot of seed packets lately have not had really good information on the back. So if you buy something that doesn't have good information on it, obviously we have a great resource with the internet. You can look that information up. But again, a lot of extension services put out seed starting timetables that are for specifically for your area. So this was put out by the University of Minnesota, and it talks about flowers and vegetables and what month you should start them by seed, and what you can like how long it's going to take for it to germinate, and for it to be able to be ready to be transplanted into your garden. So those resources are also available to you online as well. Again, if you have any questions about starting seeds, let me know. We've been doing this for a number of years. So again, when it comes to starting seeds, always follow the directions on the seed packet. And the rule of thumb is only plant the seeds as deep as they are in size, except when it comes to flowers like annuals. A lot of those need to be sown on the surface because they do need light to germinate. And the other one would be Nasturtiums seeds. They actually have to be planted 1 to 1.5 inches deep for them to germinate and grow. And nasturtiums are one of my favorites. Besides marigolds, I have nasturtiums coming up everywhere in my garden. Nasturtium flowers and the leaves are edible, and they have just this great flavor to them, kind of a little bit like a little spicy cinnamon kind of a taste, but they are beautiful in a salad. They're beautiful in the garden. They get nice and bushy, and they produce seeds that you can easily dry and save year after year after year. So besides marigolds are one of my favorites to use. Oh, let's see. So in Duluth, we have to be aware of our frost dates. And for those of you in other parts of the country, you're going to be a little shocked by this. But our frost dates can happen anywhere from September 19th to May 23rd. So the earliest that they recommend planting is after May 23rd. So a lot of people, their rule of thumb is don't plant anything in the garden except for things like spinach or peas, maybe beans, before Memorial Day, because then you're less likely to have any experience with frost. And then be prepared that September 19th is when you really want to start bringing most of your crops in. That gives you 4 months, which is 120 days. So again, you want to read the packet for those seeds, because there are certain squashes and like watermelon, they need more than 120 days. So if that's the case, kind of think about then when you should be starting those seeds inside so that you have nice, healthy transplants to put outside. I want to talk about, a lot of us buy transplants from greenhouse. So if you're not going to start seeds yourself and you go to a greenhouse to buy their nice, healthy plants, you want to be aware of the fact that you need to harden them off. So if you haven't heard of that term, it's really important. Hardening off is basically helping to acclimate that plant from going inside a nice, warm, moist, protected environment like a greenhouse and going outside where it's, subjected to harsh sun, to wind, to rain, and to colder temperatures like here in northern Minnesota. The biggest mistake I've seen that people make time and time again is they buy perennial flowers, they buy annual flowers, they buy beautiful flowering baskets, they buy transplants, and they put them directly into the garden because they're, so excited to get stuff going. And then they come out the next day and they're either laying on the ground or they're, doing very poorly. And the problem with that is if you don't harden them off, it shocks that plant. And a plant that's been shocked is not going to be as healthy, and it's likely not going to produce as much produce as you'd like it to, especially when it comes to tomatoes and peppers. So you have to harden it off, and you can harden it off in different ways. I typically harden my stuff off. I put it outside for a couple hours, sometimes in kind of a semi-shady area, not the direct harsh sun. put it out for a couple hours a day, bring it into a protected area like your garage or, patio, inside your house by your patio, and put it out the next day for a little bit longer, and do that for even 3, 4, 5 days will really make a difference in the health of that plant. Sometimes you need to do it longer. Like right now, our evening temperatures here in Duluth, Minnesota area are getting down to freezing. And it looks like we're going to have this for about at least another week. I'm hoping it'll start warming up. But certain things, I don't plant my tomatoes and peppers until sometime around June 10th, which is still, what is that? About a month away, and a little more than a month away. So, be a little cautious. I know all of you want to get to your greenhouses and want to buy all these incredible plants, but just be prepared that you're going to need to baby them and protect them and harden them off. So I want to talk about sunlight, watering, weeding, mulches, compost, fertilizers, and manures. How are we doing on time?
We're at 11:58, so about 15 minutes left to the hour, but you can go over.
Okay. So I'll go a little fast through this because, again, this is all going to be available to you. Even my entire presentation, I'm going to make it available to all of you. Sunlight, most plants require full sun, 6 to 8 hours. Partial shade is 4 to 6 hours, and full shade is 0 to 4 hours of sun, and like filtered sun even. There are many herbs that do well in shade. I know you are going to get a great handout on annual and perennial herbs, but a lot of herbs like oregano, sorrel, mint, chives, parsley, cilantro, lemon balm, thyme, tarragon, bergamot, which is bee balm, anise, and some vegetables and fruits are actually very shade tolerant. Things like lettuce, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, arugula, endive, even strawberries and raspberries you can grow in partial shade. Broccoli and its relatives like kale, kohlrabi, turnips, mustard also can grow in partial shade. You might not get as much of a head on your broccoli, but you will get broccoli because I have grown mine in my garden in partial shade. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, and corn need 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. And I caution people about growing corn. Corn is the heaviest feeder of pretty much any vegetable that I've come into contact with. They really totally deplete your soils of everything, of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients. So it's really hard to build up that soil after you've planted corn in there. And that's part of why they use so many chemicals on commercially grown corn, because every year it depletes the soil. So they have to put more chemicals and, in order to grow corn in that same field year after year after year. And once you deplete the soils to a certain extent, they don't really recover. I have driven through parts of Kansas, Nebraska, and you can see the fields are like there's this white on them, and that salt that has been brought up to the surface, and it's because because of the chemicals that they're using to grow these crops year after year. And some of that land is totally sterile. Regardless of what they add to it, they're not going to get anything growing in it. So just keep that in mind when it comes to corn. And I know all of us love corn. We also have a problem here in northern Minnesota with raccoons, and so sometimes they've gotten to the corn before we have, which is kind of frustrating. Watering, here's my other tip for you, and it's so appropriate because this weekend is Mother's Day, and then Father's Day is coming up in June. Get yourself a rain gauge, and they make a great gift for both Mother's Day and Father's Day. You can get small rain gauges. I have a really big one that we kind of put out a ways, so when it rains, we can actually see how much we've gotten, but they're just invaluable. And here's why it's important. A good general guideline is your garden needs 1 inch of water per week at 60-degree temperature, either by rain or by watering. In arid climates, like in South Carolina, it's going to be more than double that, maybe even triple. And hot weather, vegetables need even more water, up to an additional 1/2 inch per week extra for every 10 degrees that the average temperature is above 60 degrees. So at 70 degrees, you need 1.5 inches of water a week, 80 degrees, 2 inches of water, And yes, here in northern Minnesota, we do get sometimes 90-degree weather, and there you're going to need 2.5 inches of water at 90 degrees. Sometimes with your containers, you have to water them every day, sometimes even twice a day. So be aware of that when you're doing container gardening. Don't let them dry out. Mulch really helps to hold that moisture in. So again, if you're going to grow in containers, you really need to be mulching. It's best to water early in the morning from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. because there's less evaporation and less likely to develop fungi, bacteria, and insect damage and rot if you water at night. I know a lot of people are tempted to, you're working during the day, you get home at 5 or 6 and you start watering. You're going to have problems if you water at that time. Try and get a timer if you can and set it for watering between 5 and 10 in the morning is really the best time. Hint, I would recommend that you not start an edible garden if you're going on a long vacation. I can't tell you the number of stories I've heard over the last 40 years that I've been gardening about, oh, they put in this great garden and they put, had containers and they watered them really well. And then they went on vacation for 2 weeks. They came back, half the stuff was dead. The weeds were, this high, and they just got really frustrated. So unless you've got a great friend or relative that you can count on to help take care of your garden, do a little weeding and water your garden and your containers while you're gone, try and avoid that urge, like we all do, to take a long vacation during the summer months. Or just, be aware of the constrictions that's going to cause. Mulches. I prefer straw and shredded leaves. I always wait until the soil has warmed up over 60 degrees to apply the mulch, because mulch not only helps to keep the moisture in, but it cools down the soil. So if you put mulch when the soil temperature is like at 40 or 50, it's going to take a lot longer for that soil to heat up. And that's not going to be beneficial to the plants that you're trying to grow. We use a lot of wood chips around our fruit trees, pine needles around our blueberries. Besides helping to keep the moisture in, it helps to keep the unwanted plants down when you mulch. I even use straw to cover the soil in my containers once the plants are large enough. And then I already told you last year I experimented with mosses and that was very successful. So I will do that again this year as well. I would caution any use of bagged mulches or dyed mulches. You don't know where they've come from. If they could be carrying diseases, you don't really want to use any kind of a dyed mulch. And they could also have come from a rainforest and be part of the problem of depleting our rainforest. So I really caution you to use, if you use bag mulches. A lot of the tree services will provide at a minimal fee some great wood chips that are from your local area. Compost. It's important to use compost as a soil amendment. I talked a little bit about that earlier. And why compost is important is it improves the physical, chemical, and biological properties of soil. Adding compost will increase the moisture holding capacity of sandy soils, thereby reducing drought damage to plants. If your soil lacks organic matter and is compacted or doesn't retain water, compost makes a great amendment. Fertilizer and manure. My favorite fertilizer is called Co-op Poop. It's a pelletized chicken manure, and it's available online, and call around to find out what stores or hardware stores will carry it in your area. How are we doing for time?
Doing good.
Okay. Another fertilizer I like to use is liquid seaweed. It's not high in nitrogen, but it has a lot of micronutrients in it, and it's great for doing any kind of foliage feeding. You can use fish emulsion, but just be aware that it's very stinky. You really want to dilute it considerably to help cut down on that smell. And I never use fish emulsion with any of my plants inside the house because of that. I also really recommend worm juice. Worm castings are a great source of nitrogen. Just remember to dilute a lot. If you're going to buy composted manure bags, make sure you read the label. Some only contain 10% actual manure. The rest are all these additives, either sand or perlite or some black dirt, but only 10%. So read the labels if you buy any bagged compost. And never use Milorganite. Milorganite is made from sewage from Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and it may contain unwanted chemicals. So I do not recommend using Milorganite. Again, you want something that's been certified organic so that you know that what you're putting on your garden and what you're going to be eventually ingesting is healthy for you and doesn't contain any chemicals. One of the things that I like to use a lot is I save my eggshells. Here's another little tip. I save my eggshells all winter long and store them in the freezer. And then I use my pastry roller and smash them all up. And I will put a couple tablespoons of that in the bottom of every hole that I dig for my tomatoes and peppers and squash. That also helps to provide that calcium and prevent blossom end rot. Herbs, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on herbs. There's a great handout that I have. It talks about perennial herbs in a garden and versus an annual herb garden. I will tell you that our ancestors, they grew a lot of herbs, so much more than we grow today. And they usually put their herb garden right outside the kitchen door because then it's right there when they need it for adding additional flavor and spice to the foods that they're preparing. So there's a great handout here that gives you tons of information about some of the benefits and which ones are perennials and annuals, which you do need to know, especially up here in northern Minnesota. You need to know how cold hardy they are and what zone, based on what zone you're living in. So the only other addition for herbs is I really recommend getting a dehydrator. My husband was able to find really cheap dehydrators at local garage sales, anywhere from $5 to $15. So you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars buying a really fancy dehydrator. Go to some rummage sales or send your husband to rummage sales looking for one. You want to find one that has a control for the temperature and has a blower so it can blow that air. But the other thing is you don't even need a dehydrator. You can just hang them up in a nice, warm, darker area of your house. We've got a great closet that's on the south-facing side of the house that warms up, and that's been a great place for bundling up my herbs and hanging them upside down and drying them. But again, so much information is available online. Here's what I want to end with. So here's what I know. It's better to have an imperfect organic garden, a funny-looking garden, a garden full of experiments and mistakes than never having tried in the first place. I wish all of you good luck and experience the magic of gardening this year and for years to come. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from some of you.
Well done.
How much time did I go over?
You didn't. You ended just on the right time.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.